The American Tag Team Championship was the primary tag team title in the Dallas territory of the National Wrestling Alliance, what would come to be known as World Class Championship Wrestling in 1982. We'll take a look at every team that held the tag title, including the predecessor and successor to the American Tag Championship. As with other title lineage videos like this on this channel, it won't be a deep dive into each and every title reign, but we will slow down and take a look at some interesting points along the way. I will tell you up front, the USWA will not be included in this video. I'll get more into that at the end. It's a fairly long history with a few twists and turns. You're going to hear the word officially a lot, so let's get into it. The title officially began as the Texas version of the NWA United States Tag Team Championship, with the lineage beginning in November 1966. The Internationals Al Costello and Carl von Bronner were originally introduced to fans in Dallas as winning a tournament to become World Tag Team Champions, but by the time they made their first defense on December 14, 1966, they were billed as United States Tag Team Champions. They likely won the championship in a Phantom tournament, as there was never a date, location, or opponents in the finals announced. Over the next several weeks, Costello and von Bronner defended against various combinations of Bearcat Wright, Skandar Akbar, Waldo Von Erich, and Fritz Von Erich, before finally dropping the belts to Fritz and Waldo Von Erich on February 21, 1967 in Dallas. Not surprisingly, you'll hear the name Fritz Von Erich a lot over the next few minutes. Fritz and Waldo held the belts for 168 days, dropping them to Brute Bernard and Mike Paudousis on August 8, 1967 in Dallas. Brute and Mike were champions for a little over a month, dropping them back to Fritz and Waldo Von Erich on September 11, 1967 in Fort Worth. This made the Von Erichs the first team to hold the championship more than once, and was also the last championship the Kayfabe brothers held together. Fritz and Waldo held the belts another 22 days before dropping them back to Brute Bernard and Mike Paudousis in Dallas on October 3, 1967. Bernard and Paudousis only held the belts another 20 days before they lost them to Gary Hart and the Spoiler in Fort Worth on October 23, 1967. Of course, Gary Hart is primarily remembered as a manager, but he did his fair share of wrestling as well. Hart started his career in Chicago in the early 1960s, before moving on to big-time wrestling in Detroit. Hart feuded with the likes of Fred Curry and Gino Brito, while teaming with Killer Carl Cox and The Student, who would go on to be best known as George the Animal Steele. In 1966, he moved on to the Amarillo, Texas-based Western States, where he feuded with Dory Jr. and Terry Funk, before heading to Dallas's big-time wrestling, making his debut in November 1966. Soon after, Hart was the man who exposed to fans that Fritz Von Erich was not really German, but was from Texas, saying his name was Jack Atkinson, he went to SMU, and his daddy was a thief. That almost immediately turned the hated and feared Von Erich into a hometown babyface. He feuded with Fritz in the ring while working and feuding with Fritz behind the scenes for the next 20 years. Gary Hart's first championship reign lasted 99 days before he and the Spoiler dropped the U.S. tag belts to Fritz Von Erich and Billy Red Lions on January 30, 1968 in Dallas. Fritz's third time around with his half of the tag belts lasted 83 days, ending when he and Lions lost the title to the Spoilers, Spoiler number 1 and Spoiler number 2, managed by Gary Hart on April 22, 1968. The Spoilers feuded with Von Erich and Lions over the belts for the next several weeks, with the Spoilers actually losing the belts to them on May 14th in Dallas. However, the decision was overturned by the NWA because Grizzly Smith replaced an injured Lions for the third fall of the best 2 out of 3 falls match. It was around this time the name of the tag championship was changed to the NWA American Tag Team Championship, a name it would have into the 1980s. 3 days after that reverse decision, Spoiler number 2 was unmasked in a match against Argentine Apollo in Houston and exposed as being Smasher Sloan, though he would sporadically continue to appear as Spoiler number 2. The Spoilers held the tag titles a total of 92 days, finally losing them on July 23, 1968 to Fritz Von Erich and Grizzly Smith in Dallas. Von Erich and Smith had a 49-day title reign, losing the belts to the Spoiler and Gary Hart on September 10, 1968 in Dallas. That marked the last championship Hart held as a wrestler, and the reign included the Spoiler unmasking for some time and revealing himself as Don Jardine. Spoiler and Hart lost the belts to Fritz Von Erich and Dan Miller on December 17, 1968 in Dallas. This made Fritz a 5-time tag champion overall, with his 4th different partner. Von Erich and Miller held the belts about 3 months, though there is no specific date given for when the reign ended. Miller was injured in a match against Johnny Valentine on March 10, 1969, and forced to give up his half of the championship. Fred Curry was allowed to replace Miller as one half of the tag champions. However, Curry was also injured by Johnny Valentine shortly thereafter, at which time Von Erich also surrendered his half of the title, and the belts were left vacant. All this happened during a long, bitter feud between Von Erich and Valentine. The tag titles remained vacant until June 27, 1969, when Wahoo McDaniel and Thunderbolt Patterson defeated Baron Von Raschke and Buster Lloyd in a tournament final in Houston to fill the vacancy. Anytime Thunderbolt Patterson pops up in a title lineage video, you know all bets are off. And McDaniel and Patterson briefly dropped the belts to the now unusual combination of Dusty Rhodes and Baron Von Raschke, though an exact date the change happened is hard to determine. The best I can tell, Von Raschke and Rhodes took the belts in late July, and on August 1, 1969, dropped them back to McDaniel and Patterson in Houston. Sometime in September, the titles were vacated, though I couldn't find why. Both McDaniel and Patterson continued to appear in the territory, so I'm not sure what happened. Officially, Boris Malenko and Lord Charles Montague were recognized as winning the American tag titles on September 30th, 1969, though no location was ever given or exactly how they won the titles was revealed. However they got the belts, Malenko and Montague held them into 1970 before dropping them to Wahoo McDaniel and Antonio Puglisi in Dallas on January 20th. McDaniel and Puglisi had a 55-day run with the belts, dropping them to Killer Carl Cox and Boris Malenko on March 16, 1970 in Fort Worth. The last recorded defense for Cox and Malenko was on April 14, 1970 against Mil Mascaras and Wahoo McDaniel. That match ended in a time-limit draw. After that, the titles were unceremoniously vacated, but again, there was never a reason given. The championship remained vacant through the summer of 1970 until Killer Carl Cox and Mike York defeated Wahoo McDaniel and Mr. Wrestling in a tournament final to take the belts on September 2, 1970 in San Antonio. As far as I could find, Cox and York only defended the championship once on September 9th in San Antonio against McDaniel and Mr. Wrestling, and only tagged together one more time after that in November against George Scott and Toru Tanaka. By December, both were out of the territory, with nothing announced one way or the other about the tag championship. On December 11, 1970, the Texas Outlaws Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch were announced as American Tag Team Champions with no further explanation given. So apparently, they were just given the belts and let fans assume they beat somebody somewhere for them. Whatever title reign Rhodes and Murdoch had was a short one, with the Outlaws dropping the belts to Mr. Wrestling and George Scott on December 15, 1970 in Dallas. George Scott is a name that has somewhat faded over time, but Scott had a very successful career as both a wrestler and behind the scenes. Scott's career began in 1950, and by 1954 he and his brother Sandy won the NWA Alberta Tag Championship as the Flying Scots. They would go on to be 5-time Stampede International Tag Champions and hold both versions of the NWA and AWA World Tag Team Championships. Holding the American tag titles with Mr. Wrestling was actually the last championship George would hold. Even before retiring as an active wrestler, Scott became one of the most noted bookers in pro wrestling, changing the direction of the Mid-Atlantic territory through the 1970s. In the early 80s, he left Jim Crockett Promotions and eventually went to work for the World Wrestling Federation, taking over booking for them in 1985, and was the booker for both WrestleMania 1 and 2. After a brief stint booking in World Class in 1986 and returning to Crockett in late 1989, Scott retired to Florida, where he lived until his passing in 2014. There are some conflicting records on when Scott and Mr. Wrestling lost the American tag titles, but from what I could find, they dropped the belts in Fort Worth on February 14, 1971, to Bronco Lubitsch and Chris Markoff, managed by George Harris. This would also mark the last championship held by Bronco Lubitsch, who of course would go on to be a popular referee in Texas. There was something about the early 1970s and strange goings-on with the titles in Texas. Lubitsch and Markoff actually dropped the titles to Johnny Valentine and Wahoo McDaniel on May 3, 1971 in Fort Worth, but the title change was only recognized in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Everywhere else in Texas, Lubitsch and Markoff continued to be recognized as champions. 2 weeks later, Lubitsch and Markoff won the belts back in Fort Worth and continued their reign everywhere else in the state. So there's just a little quirky nugget in the lineage. Lubitsch and Markoff would eventually drop the belts to Valentine and McDaniel in Houston, which was recognized everywhere in the state. This official title change took place on June 25, 1971. Valentine and McDaniel held the belts for 24 days, dropping them to Thunderbolt Patterson and Toru Tanaka on July 19, 1971 in Fort Worth. With Thunderbolt Patterson back in the title picture, weird stuff started happening. On August 23, 1971, at Northside Coliseum in Fort Worth, Jose Lothario and Ray Mendoza did defeat Thunderbolt Patterson and Toru Tanaka for the tag championship. But then, apparently, they just pretended it never happened. Patterson and Tanaka continued as American Tag Champions, even defending against Lothario and Mendoza a couple of weeks later. All the wrestlers stayed in the territory, so I'm not sure what happened. Maybe it was one of those stories where the NWA stepped in and gave the belts back, and I just can't find the evidence of it. But for whatever reason, Lothario and Mendoza are not recognized as ever holding the belts. Officially, Tanaka and Patterson held the championship 108 days, which was the second longest title reign in the history of the belts at that time. Tanaka would leave the territory and head to the Worldwide Wrestling Federation in November. Patterson would be allowed to take on a new partner, and on November 11, 1971, Tanaka's half of the title was officially taken over by Johnny Valentine. The unusual combination of Patterson and Valentine held the championship another 82 days, giving Patterson a total of 190 days as one half of the American Tag Champions, and making him the wrestler with the single longest continuous reign in the title's history at that point. Patterson and Valentine's run with the championship came to an end on January 25, 1972, when they lost the belts to Fritz Von Erich and Dean Ho in Dallas. Unfortunately, Von Erich and Ho never defended the tag titles, and the American Tag Team Championship was put on the back burner for the next 2 years, though they were never officially deactivated. Officially, on January 22, 1974, the Blackjacks, Blackjack Mulligan and Blackjack Lanza, became American Tag Team Champions. Fans were told they defeated the Samoans, Afa and Sika, in a tournament final in Corpus Christi, but that was a phantom tournament. The Blackjacks held the belts 244 days, becoming the longest single reign in the history of the title. Many sources list the Blackjacks as losing the belts on July 22, 1974 to Ken Patera and Tex McKenzie, and the team did lose to Patera and McKenzie in Fort Worth, but that was a non-title match. The Blackjacks' run went uninterrupted into September 1974 when they lost the championship to Johnny Valentine and Tex McKenzie in Fort Worth on September 23rd. Valentine left the Dallas territory soon thereafter when he went back to Mid-Atlantic, soon followed by McKenzie, who landed in the Mid-America territory. The tag titles went into another long stretch being vacant, this time for 4 years, but were still never officially deactivated. Finally, on October 15, 1978 in Dallas, Kevin and David Von Erich defeated Dory Jr. and Terry Funk to officially fill the vacant championship and crown new American Tag Team Champions. The name Von Erich would continue to pop up in the title history over the years, but this was David's only time holding one of the belts. Kevin and David had a nice reign of 127 days, dropping the title to the Gary Hart-led team of Mark Lewin and The Spoiler on February 15, 1979, in Fort Worth. Lewin and The Spoiler had a lengthy reign as well, holding the belts 102 days before losing them to El Halcon and Jose Lothario on June 1, 1979, in Houston. The tag belts became a part of 2 different feuds through the rest of 1979. Jose Lothario was feuding with Gino Hernandez, who had turned on his mentor the previous year, while El Halcon had an ongoing feud with El Gran Marcus. Lothario and Halcon dropped the American tag belts to Hernandez and Marcus on July 20, 1979, in Houston. Marcus and Hernandez held the belts 35 days before losing them back to Jose Lothario and El Halcon on August 24, 1979, in Houston. The teams continued to feud over the belts, but on November 2, 1979, Halcon lost the Loser Leaves Texas match to Marcus in Houston. Sometime after that match, Gino Hernandez and El Gran Marcus were recognized as winning the American Tag Championship, though I couldn't find an exact date that reign was supposed to start. Halcon had immediately left Texas and was in EMLL in Mexico just a few days later, so it's likely fans were told Hernandez and Marcus regained the title in a Phantom match. Whatever the case, Hernandez and Marcus dropped the belts after just a few days on November 16, 1979 in Houston to Jose Lothario and Tiger Conway Jr. as the feud continued with Conway in place of Halcon. Lothario and Conway Jr. held the belts 28 days before losing them back to Gino Hernandez and El Gran Marcus on December 12, 1979, also in Houston. 14 days later, Hernandez and Marcus lost the championship back to Jose Lothario and Tiger Conway Jr. on December 28, 1979, also in Houston, and essentially bringing the feud to an end. Another 14 days later, on January 11, 1980, Lothario and Conway Jr. lost the belts to Mr. Hito and Mr. Sakurada with manager J.J. Dillon in Houston. Hito and Sakurada, who was better known as Kendo Nagasaki, held the title for 63 days before dropping the belts back to Jose Lothario and Tiger Conway Jr. in Houston on March 14, 1980, starting Lothario and Conway Jr. on a lengthy 101-day title reign. Lothario and Conway Jr. finally lost the belts back to Mr. Hito and Mr. Sakurada on June 23, 1980 in Amarillo, but they were held to a one-day reign after Hito and Sakurada's defense against Kevin and Kerry Von Erich the next night ended inconclusively, and the belts were held up. The belts remained vacant until July 1, 1980, when Mr. Hito and Mr. Sakurada won the rematch against Kevin and Kerry in Amarillo, officially giving Hito and Sakurada their third time with the belts. How long that third reign lasted is unclear. In August, both Hito and Sakurada left the territory and went to Stampede Wrestling. That led to a Phantom match to get the belts on another team. Some sources incorrectly list the new champions as El Halcon and Kevin Von Erich, but it was actually Kerry Von Erich that was paired with El Halcon, with them taking the belts sometime in early August. I could only find one match where Halcon and Von Erich defended the belts, but they kept them into October until what might have been another Phantom match. Halcon left the territory at the end of September. Fans were told Halcon was injured and Sweet Brown Sugar subbed for him in a defense against Gary Young and Gino Hernandez when he and Von Erich lost the belts. The match was said to have taken place in Houston that October, but no specific date was given. I couldn't find any records of Young and Hernandez defending the titles until the night they lost them. Bruiser Brody and Kerry Von Erich took the championship on January 11, 1981 in Dallas, settling in with about a 4-month run with the belts. The championship was officially vacated in May when Brody left the territory for Georgia after a long tour of Japan. On June 8, 1981, Al Madrill and a young Brian Blair defeated Killer Tim Brooks and Austin Idol in a tournament final to crown new tag champions. Madrill and Blair quietly held the titles over the next 3 months, losing them to Armand Hussein and Killer Tim Brooks on September 6, 1981 in Fort Worth. Brooks and Hussein defended the title fairly regularly until November, making their last successful defense of the month on November 2, 1981 against Al Madrill and Jose Lothario. Then weird stuff started happening. On a November 22, 1981 card at the Sportatorium in Dallas, Kerry Von Erich and Terry Orndorff appeared as American Tag Champions, successfully defending against Bill Irwin and Terry Gibbs. So even though there are no records of a title change, sometime between November 2nd and November 22nd, Von Erich and Orndorff took the championship. But on the December 28, 1981 card in Fort Worth, Brooks and Hussein defended against Blue Demon and El Solitario, which ended in a time limit draw. Again, there are no records of a title change in that month. Maybe there was some offhand remark made during commentary on television to explain it, but for lack of anything better, we're going to say Brooks and Hussein lost the title to Von Erich and Orndorff around November 10, 1981. Then Von Erich and Orndorff dropped the title back to Brooks and Hussein around December 1st, 1981, In the end, it all leads to more assumptions and a phantom match. Brooks actually left the territory and headed to Houston Wrestling at the end of the year. In a phantom match sometime in early 1982, Kerry Von Erich and Al Madrill took the American Tag Championship. We'll just say sometime around March 1st, 1982, as I couldn't find any specific date the match that didn't happen anyway was supposed to have happened. Some stability to the lineage finally came in April when Bugsy McGraw and King Kong Bundy defeated Kerry and Madrill on April 11, 1982 in Dallas to take the championship. This was the first championship of Bundy's career, coming just a few weeks after he turned on his trainer and mentor, Fritz Von Erich, to join Gary Hart's stable. It was also around this time the territory rebranded as World Class Championship Wrestling. McGraw and Bundy held the belts 85 days before losing them to Kevin and Kerry Von Erich on July 5, 1982 in Fort Worth. This was all given some extra flavor thanks to the long-time feud between Hart and the Von Erichs and, of course, Bundy, who had just turned on them. Kevin and Kerry held the belts for 67 days before losing them to King Kong Bundy and Bill Irwin on September 10, 1982 in Dallas. Bundy and Irwin had a 77-day run with the title, dropping them to a new babyface team in World Class, Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy, also known as the Fabulous Freebirds. Hayes and Gordy took the belts on November 26, 1982 in Dallas. The Freebirds went on to have a 203-day title reign, which would be the second longest single title reign in the history of the championship, turning heel along the way as the legendary Freebirds vs. Von Erichs feud started on Christmas night 1982. The American Tag title run for Hayes and Gordy came to an end on June 17, 1983 in Dallas, when Kerry Von Erich and Bruiser Brody took the belts for the second time. The championship would officially be vacated on October 1, 1983, with fans being told Brody had suffered an injury and was unable to defend the belts. In actuality, Brody was on the long tour of Japan through the end of the year. The vacant titles led into a very peculiar set of phantom matches. Officially, Bulldog Brower and Roddy Piper won the American Tag Team Championship in a tournament held in Detroit, Michigan in October 1983. It was a phantom tournament, and no specific date was given. Neither Brower or Piper were active in World Class at the time, and chances are they were never even in the same room with each other, much less in a tournament. Brower was winding down his career in Puerto Rico, and Piper was primarily working in Mid-Atlantic. Again, officially, the Super Destroyers then defeated Brower and Piper in Indianapolis, Indiana, before making their first World Class appearance on November 16, 1983. And this was a phantom match, giving the Super Ds the titles from a team that never tagged together and won the titles in a phantom tournament. You gotta love pro wrestling. The Super Destroyers came in during a surge of new talent to Dallas and were part of General Skandar Akbar's Devastation Incorporated, which included names like Kamala the Ugandan Giant and the Missing Link. Akbar's men began feuding with another new face to World Class, Iceman King Parsons, with the feud largely centering on the Super Ds and Parsons trying to take the American Tag Team Championship from them. Parsons succeeded with tag partner Brian Adias at the Christmas Star Wars card on December 25, 1983 in Dallas, giving both Parsons and Adias their first runs with the American Tag belts. Parsons and Adias held the title for 36 days, losing them back to Super Destroyers No. 1 and No. 2 on January 30, 1984 in Fort Worth. However, the Super Ds were not done with Parsons just yet. The Super Ds held the belts another 97 days, dropping them to Rock and Soul, consisting of Iceman King Parsons and Rock and Roll Buck Zumhoff, at the first David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions in Irving on May 6, 1984. The two teams would then trade the belts back and forth over the next several weeks. Zumhoff and Parsons only held the title 15 days in that first run, but it ended with a memorable moment. On May 15, 1984, the Super Destroyers challenged Parsons and Zumhoff for the tag titles in Fort Worth. To get the title match when and where they wanted it, the Super Ds agreed to unmask if they failed to win the titles back. The Super Destroyers did win the match, but in their frustration, Zumhoff and Parsons jumped the Super Ds and removed their masks anyway, revealing them to be brothers Scott and Bill Irwin. The former Super Ds held the championship another 44 days, losing the belts in an unusual way. At the Independence Day Star Wars card, Bill Irwin would face Iceman King Parsons in a single match with the tag titles on the line. This was considered a continuation of a match several days earlier in which Scott Irwin was injured and the match was stopped, but the titles were originally held up. Akbar disputed the decision and the match was allowed to continue, with both Scott and Zumhoff removed to make it a one-on-one match. Parsons won the match, giving him and Zumhoff their second run with the American Tag Championship. Rock and Soul held the belts for 86 days, dropping them back to Scott and Bill Irwin, who were now rebranded as the Long Riders, and officially giving them their fourth title reign. Scott and Bill only held the championship 24 days before things went in a different direction, with the Long Riders losing the belts to the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, on October 22, 1984, in Fort Worth. The Fantastics entered into a feud with the Midnight Express, Dennis Condrey and Bobby Eaton, who came into the territory in December, dropping the belts to the Jim Cornette-managed team on January 11, 1985 in Dallas, and ending the Fantastics' run at 81 days. Officially, the Midnight's title reign lasted 56 days when the belts were held up after a March 8th defense against Bobby and Tommy at the Sportatorium. Jim Cornette interfered in the match using his infamous tennis racket to help the Midnights. The titles remained vacant 59 days, with a rematch finally scheduled for the second annual David Von Erich Memorial Parade of Champions on May 5, 1985 at Texas Stadium. It turned into a complete botch fest. Because of a big 12-man tag team match making use of 2 rings, some other matches at the second Memorial Parade of Champions made use of the 2 rings, and this included the match for the American Tag Team Championship. All 4 men would be legal in the match at the same time, with pinfalls counting in either ring. Also, for this match, the Fantastics brought in Little John, a 7-foot 5-inch figure you may also know as Silo Sam, to be at ringside to keep Jim Cornette in check. The finish was supposed to be Little John tripping up Eaton in one ring, who was then pinned by Rogers, while Condrey was pinning Fulton in the other ring. The Rogers pin would be just before the Condrey pin, giving the Fantastics the win. When the moment came, a hesitation by Little John, coupled with referee Rick Hazard being in the wrong position, left the Rogers pin coming late, and Condrey clearly pinning Fulton first. Initially, the Midnight Express were declared the winners, but the decision was then reversed, with little explanation as to why the decision was reversed. It basically just came off looking like a screw job on the Midnight Express. Add to that a bit at the end that was intended to be Cornette hitting Little John in the back with the tennis racket, and John taking the racket and breaking it in 2, was also messed up. That came out looking okay. The racket had been fixed to break easily, and ended up breaking on John's back. Despite the sloppy title change, Rogers and Fulton held the titles another 49 days before dropping them to the dynamic duo, Chris Adams and Gino Hernandez, on June 24, 1985 in Fort Worth. This thrust the American Tag Team Championship up another level, as Adams and Hernandez were feuding with the Von Erichs. Adams and Hernandez held the title 81 days before the belts were held up after a September 13, 1985 match against Kevin and Kerry Von Erich ended in a double disqualification. In a rematch 7 days later, Kevin and Kerry Von Erich took the championship on September 20, 1985, in Dallas. This marked the second time Kevin and Kerry held the belts, with the 2 reigns coming more than 3 years apart. Kevin and Kerry kept the championship for 28 days before the title was held up again after a controversial ending to a match against Adams and Hernandez on October 18th. The championship remained vacant 41 days before a rematch was finally scheduled for the Thanksgiving Day Star Wars card on November 28, 1985 in Dallas, with Chris Adams and Gino Hernandez regaining the belts for their second reign. Adams and Hernandez would take the title into 1986, but the title run officially ended in January when the team broke up and started a feud with each other, escalating when Hernandez used the infamous Freebird hair cream to blind Adams in one eye. That was meant to set up Hernandez versus Adams as one of the top feuds in the territory in 1986, but of course it never happened. Gino Hernandez would be found dead of an apparent drug overdose on February 2, 1986. As for the Tag Championship, it would remain vacant until September and have a new name attached. On February 18th, World Class broke away from the National Wrestling Alliance and formed the World Class Wrestling Association. The American Tag Team Championship was then recognized as the WCWA World Tag Team Championship. On September 1st, 1986, Matt Bourne and Buzz Sawyer, managed by Percy Pringle III, defeated Chris Adams and Lance Von Erich in a tournament final in Fort Worth to crown new WCWA World Tag Team Champions. Sawyer abruptly left World Class in November, no-showing the defense on November 17, 1986, and being replaced by Master G. The title run ended at 67 days when Bourne and G lost the championship to Lance Von Erich and Dingo Warrior in Fort Worth. Now, I'm making an assumption here, but there might have been a planned feud between the two teams that was scrapped when Sawyer left. If plans changed or not, Lance and Dingo had a short run with the belts, dropping them 14 days later to Al Madrill and a now heel Ryan Adias on December 1st, 1986 in Fort Worth. Madrill and Adias had a nice run of 93 days before they lost the championship to the Fantastics Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers on March 4th, 1987 in Lubbock, Texas, the first time the tag championship changed hands in Lubbock under any name. Rogers and Fulton entered a feud with Rock and Roll RPM's Mike Davis and Tommy Lane over the belts. The RPMs won a match for the World Tag title against the Fantastics on April 6, 1987 in Fort Worth, ending the run at 33 days, but some shenanigans took place. Referee Rick Hazard was knocked down and almost out. While Hazard recovered, Eric Embry jumped in the ring wearing gear exactly like the RPMs and actually gained the winning pinfall. A groggy Hazard was able to make the 3 count. However, the decision was nullified by WCWA and the titles held up. The RPMs were not recognized as winning the belts. The titles remained vacant until May 4th, 1987, when the Fantastics defeated the RPMs in a rematch in Fort Worth, making Rogers and Fulton the first 2-time champions since the title was upgraded to a World Tag Team Championship. Rogers and Fulton held the belts another 53 days before they lost them to Eric Embry and Frankie Lancaster in Dallas on June 26, 1987. There is some confusion with when Embry and Lancaster lost the championship, with some sources listing they lost the title to Steve and Sean Simpson in August, while others say it was September at Labor Day Star Wars, and some actually list both. Honestly, I don't remember, and I can't find video of the 1987 Labor Day Star Wars card to confirm anything one way or the other. I did notice one source that listed in September had Embry and Lancaster's days as champions at 42, which would actually line up with losing the belts on August 7th, 1987. So that's what I'm going with. Steve and Sean Simpson take the World Tag title on August 7th. It's possible the match at Labor Day Star Wars was a defense by the Simpson brothers, or maybe there was some kind of controversy and the titles were held up. We'll just have to put an asterisk by this one because I'm really not sure. Frankie Lancaster did regain the championship on October 12, 1987, this time with Brian Adias as his tag team partner, defeating Sean Simpson and Skip Young, who was subbing for Steve Simpson. Adias and Lancaster held the belts 44 days before losing them to Kerry and Kevin Von Erich on November 25, 1987 in Shreveport, Louisiana. This was Kerry's first championship after coming back from his motorcycle accident and, as we now know, was wrestling on a prosthetic foot. Sometime in early 1988, Iceman King Parsons and Terry Taylor took the World Tag titles from Kevin and Kerry. This was likely a Phantom match, as I can find no specific date or location, and again, have no memory of it myself. It might have been a quick change to try and stir up interest in the main event, as Kevin and Kerry got the title right back. On July 1st, 1988, at the Sportatorium, Kevin and Kerry did regain the World Tag Championship, setting off on their second turn as world champions. Kevin and Kerry held the belts 42 days before losing them to the Buddy Roberts-led Samoan SWAT team, Fatu and Samu, on August 12, 1988, in Dallas. Fatu and Samu had a 35-day reign, dropping the belts to former Freebird Michael Hayes and his new tag team partner, Steve Cox, on September 16, 1988. Hayes and Cox only held the titles 3 days, losing them back to the Samoan SWAT team on September 19, 1988, in Memphis, Tennessee. This was the early stages of the merger between WCWA and the CWA that would create the United States Wrestling Association. After 26 days, Fatu and Samu lost the World Tag titles back to Michael Hayes and Steve Cox at the 5th and final Cotton Bowl Extravaganza in Dallas on October 15, 1988. Hayes and Cox had an even shorter run with the belts, losing them back to Fatu and Samu 2 days later in Fort Worth on October 17, 1988. Steve Cox was injured when he was attacked by Buddy Roberts in the SST before the match, forcing Hayes to face Fatu and Samu alone. When Fatu and Samu's third run with the World Tag Titles ended is unclear. The SST did take the belts in 1989, but left WCWA and went to Crockett Promotions, making their first appearance with them on February 12, 1989. Kevin and Kerry Von Erich were awarded the belts. Seems February 12, 1989 is as good a day as any to begin the short run Kevin and Kerry had for their final run as World Tag Team Champions. On February 17, 1989, Jimmy Golden and Robert Fuller took the tag titles from Kevin and Kerry in Dallas. Kevin and Kerry were actually disqualified in this match, and per WCWA rules, the championship changed hands on the DQ. Golden and Fuller held the belts 23 days before dropping them to Kerry Von Erich and Jeff Jarrett on March 12, 1989 in Fort Worth. The Jarrett and Von Erich combination had a lengthy reign for the time period, holding the belt 68 days before they dropped them to Super Zodiac and Cactus Jack Manson in Dallas on May 19, 1989. Zodiac was actually Gary Young, and of course Cactus Jack Manson is better known as Mick Foley. Manson and Zodiac held the championship 21 days before losing the belts to Mil Mascaras and Jeff Jarrett in Dallas on June 9, 1989. Jarrett and Mascaras only held the belts 14 days, dropping them to Brian Lee and Robert Fuller in Dallas on June 23, 1989. 7 days later, Lee and Fuller lost the championship to Jeff Jarrett and Matt Bourne in Dallas on June 30, 1989. That gave Jarrett his third run with the WCWA World Tag Titles with his third different partner, all coming in about a 3.5-month span. Jarrett and Bourne have the designation of being the last team to lose the WCWA World Tag Team Championship, dropping the belts to Cactus Jack and Scott Braddock on August 4, 1989 in Dallas. Officially, there's that word again, Jack and Braddock held the WCWA World Tag Team Championship for 1 day. After that, they were then recognized as USWA World Tag Team Champions. Technically, the title lineage does continue as the USWA World Tag Team Championship, but I think I'm going to do a USWA-specific lineage video later on. The title lasted less than a decade as the USWA tag titles, but there is an absolute ton of title changes in that time. It's also a little iffy if it's even considered a lineage of the same title, as while there was a merger, the Von Erichs did retain rights to the World Class and WCWA names. It would just be a lot easier if I made it its own thing. So, unofficially, we end the title history there. Just over 2 decades, 3 different title names, and a lot of big names in pro wrestling holding the belts. Kerry Von Erich has the distinction of holding one half of the title more times than any other wrestler, with 11 reigns and 6 different partners. I hope you enjoyed this title history video. If you'd like to see more videos on the lineage of other championships, you can click the playlist on the end screen, or check out one of the other videos on the channel. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe, not necessarily in that order, and I will see you next time.